Welcome to today's discussion on Connecting Communities, Bridging the Rural Digital Divide. I'm John Lentz, the Editorial Director of City and State, a leading politics and policy publication in New York. And we're pleased to be partnering with Charter Communications on this important policy discussion. Today, you'll hear from key public officials at the local, state, and federal level, and industry leaders who are grappling with this issue every day and finding ways to expand access to high-speed internet in rural areas. You'll hear about investments and initiatives at all three levels of government, what's been accomplished so far, what's still in play, and how officials at every level are collaborating to close the digital divide. But before we get started, I'd like to introduce Alex Camarda, Associate Vice President for State Government Affairs at Charter Communications, who will kick things off for us and introduce our featured speaker. With a focus on upstate New York, Alex manages a team of 4 outside of New York City working on business development, local franchising, and resolving elected officials' inquiries for the company. He also brings extensive experience with the legislative and advocacy processes, thanks to his past work with the good government organizations Reinvent Albany and Citizens Union, as well as in key staff roles in the State Senate and in the New York City Department of Education. Alex, welcome.
Thank you, John, and good morning. I'm Alex Camarda, Associate Vice President of State Government Affairs for Charter Communications. It's a pleasure to be here representing Charter, which operates the Spectrum brand of broadband connectivity products and services. We provide TV, internet, voice, and mobile services to over 3.5 million customers in over 1,100 communities across New York State with over 10,000 employees. I'd like to thank City and State New York for partnering with us to host this conversation today. The importance of closing the digital divide is something we can all agree on, and we cannot do that until 100% of the state and country has access to reliable, high-speed internet service. Charter has long been committed to expanding high-speed broadband in rural areas. Our multi-year, multi-billion-dollar rural construction initiative will add an additional 100,000 miles of fiber optic network infrastructure to deliver symmetrical multi-gigabit speed internet access to approximately 1.75 million rural homes and small businesses across the country. In 2023 alone, Charter extended its network to reach more than 1.4 million additional homes and businesses across the country, including 295,000 new locations reached through our Rural Construction Initiative. Here in New York, Charter extended its network to reach an additional 70,000 homes and small businesses just last year, including 1,000 new locations reached through our Rural Construction Initiative. And we have been recognized for it. Spectrum is now the #1 rural internet provider in the nation. We deliver the same high-value, quality products and services to rural areas as are available in the biggest cities, including gigabit speeds available across our entire footprint, 99% reliability, no data caps, modem fees, or contracts, and customer service from our in-house onshore workforce. And Charter employs a national pricing structure, which ensures that rural customers receive the same pricing as other highly competitive areas in the state. Charter has a history of helping to close the digital divide with a comprehensive approach that addresses broadband access, adoption, and digital literacy. As the broadband service provider, it is our priority at Charter to keep communities connected through affordable, high-speed internet. We are a leader in delivering life-changing high-speed internet service to low-income families, having helped millions of low-income households and seniors get and stay connected to the internet. We're doing our part to help ensure high-speed internet remains within reach for every family in America, regardless of their income. To increase adoption and access to technology, we offer philanthropic support to community organizations that provide computers, digital education classes, and technology labs for thousands across the country. Today, we're going to hear from key policymakers and county representatives, and as we will discuss federal, state, and local level efforts to bridge the gap and connect communities across New York State. Our first speaker is Congressmember Joe Morelle, who represents New York's 25th Congressional District, which includes Monroe County and a section of neighboring Orleans County. A lifelong resident of upstate New York, Representative Morelle is a former small business owner and was previously elected to the Monroe County Legislature as well as the New York State Assembly, where he served as Majority Leader from 2013 to 2018. Throughout his career, Representative Morelli has worked diligently to improve and expand access to healthcare for all people, grow our economy, and protect our communities. It's my honor to introduce our featured speaker via video, Congressman Joe Morelli.
Good morning. I'm Congressman Joe Morelli, representing Rochester, New York, in New York's 25th Congressional District. Thank you to Alex Camarda for the introduction, and my friends at Charter Spectrum and the entire team at City and State for their dedicated work to organize this event and ensure everything goes off without a hitch. I apologize that I'm unable to join you live due to my obligations here in Washington, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to share this video message with you, underscoring my commitment to expanding broadband access for everyone in America and highlighting some of the work we're doing at the federal level to make that dream a reality. In today's society, especially as we continue in a post-pandemic world, it's become clear internet access is no longer a luxury. It's a fundamental requirement to participate in daily life. And sadly, there are still far too many people who lack access to broadband or have unreliable service. For those without access, it's more difficult for them to stay connected with schools and teachers, doctors and other healthcare providers, employment opportunities, media and information, the online marketplace, and so much more. This puts them at an unfair disadvantage. Sadly, this digital divide disproportionately affects many traditionally underserved communities, further exacerbating existing inequalities in our society. Events like this one are so important to addressing this divide and helping to ensure we're working at every level to bridge the gap and bring everyone along with us into the economies and technologies of the future. As many of you know, closing the digital divide has long been one of my top priorities in Congress, and I'm proud of the work we've done to expand broadband access to our families. In 2021, Congress passed two pieces of legislation critical to this mission: the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act and the American Rescue Plan Act. Both of these bills contain significant funding for a wide range of infrastructure projects, including the expansion of broadband access to rural and low-income communities. The Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act included $65 billion specifically to support infrastructure projects which close the digital divide, including $664 million for broadband deployment projects right here in New York State. The IIJA also created the Affordable Connectivity Program, the largest internet affordability program in the history of our nation. As of February 2024, the ACP helps 23 million American households save up to $30 on their monthly internet bills, money they can instead use to refill their prescription medications or put food on their tables. Over 1.7 million households in New York State were enrolled in this program, roughly 1 out of every 4 households statewide, receiving a total of $838 million in support. Here in my district, nearly 80,000 households participate in this program, receiving over $41.6 million in federal assistance. Sadly, the ACP, as you know, is rapidly running out of funding, and without action, these families will once again be left to bear the full cost of their internet bills. I've joined a group of over 200 bipartisan colleagues in the House on legislation to extend this program and keep the benefit alive, and you can count on me to continue this fight on behalf of our families. Additionally, since the passage of the American Rescue Plan Act in 2021, I've been proud to support Rochester leaders and organizations as they announce transformative investments in our community. One of these announcements was just this past October, when Monroe County Executive Adam Bello announced $6 million in federal funding to support the construction of wired internet connections to unserved communities and businesses in our rural communities and establish a wireless community broadband network in portions of the city of Rochester. This funding is going to give more families the tools they need to succeed and address the social determinants of health, which hold too many people back from their full potential. While we've certainly made great progress with these two pieces of legislation, our work here in Washington to address broadband access is far from over. As a member of the House Appropriations Committee, I'm going to keep working with my colleagues to secure federal dollars to bolster our broadband infrastructure and increase internet accessibility for every family, because no one should be left behind in the digital age. If you have any questions about my efforts on this topic or any of my work in Congress, please don't hesitate to contact my office, or you can visit www.morelli.house.gov to learn more. I'll close by saying thank you once again to Charter, Spectrum, and City and State for the opportunity to share this message with you today. I look forward to continuing our work together to close the digital divide and uplift all of our families. God bless you all.
Thank you, Congressmember Morelli. I would now like to introduce my colleague, Jill Luther, Associate Vice President of the State Government Affairs for Charter, who will lead a one-on-one conversation with our next guest speaker, New York State Assembly Member Kerry Warner. Jill?
Thank you so much, Alex. And I have the distinct honor and pleasure today, as Alex said, of introducing New York State Assembly Member Kerry Warner. Kerry Warner is a dedicated leader in New York State who has spent years now advocating for broadband for all. She is elected to the Assembly District 113. She has been in office since January of 2015, and she has spent these years advocating to improve the business climate for small businesses, farms, working to strengthen the public schools across Saratoga, Warren, and Washington counties. She has done tremendous work. She has been recognized as one of the most productive legislators in New York State as well. She has passed 68 bills in the New York State Assembly, and 49 of those have become law, which is a very significant number. So I think this all speaks to how much Assemblywoman Kerry Warner does for her community and for the constituents in her communities. Thank you so much, Assemblymember Warner. We are so grateful to have you join us today.
Thank you, Jill. It's a pleasure to be with you. Add my thanks to Spectrum, to City and State for putting this together, because this is such an enduringly important topic. And I hope at one point we will get to a place where every single household in New York State is wired for high-speed broadband. We're not there yet, but I have every confidence that we can get there. And I appreciate Spectrum's efforts and City and State's efforts to keep this issue on the forefront.
Thank you so much. So speaking of that, let's jump right in. We have some really interesting topics to discuss today as well. So as we as a state are trying to reach that goal that you just stated, can you talk us through some of the challenges? What do you see as most significant or problematic in hindering broadband deployment in these unserved as well as underserved areas and communities? And what can policymakers do to address those obstacles?
That is really just an excellent question, Jill, and really sort of foundational. So as we think about where we are in the overall broadband deployment, we've gotten to the place where we're reaching the unserved areas are the ones that are going to be the hardest and the most expensive to reach. So they are the lowest density areas where you have, you've got 10 houses in a mile, 5 houses in a mile. There's long distances between the houses, and that makes it very expensive to reach those locations. But nonetheless, it's really important. And as we think about the governor's push for more housing across the state, which we desperately need, in the 21st century, we're going to need those houses to have access to modern telecommunications. And that means making sure that there's wired broadband that goes to every single household. Just like we bring power on the poles to every single household, we have to bring wired broadband as well. So the first challenge, of course, is just a lack of density, which drives up the cost of delivering this service. And so I think we really have to think about what can we do. We have, as Congressman Morelli articulated, there's a fair amount of federal money still to come to the state to help make this more reasonable for corporations to invest. But there are other things that money's not going to go as far as we think it's going to. So we've got to think of some other ways in which we can help normalize the cost or lower the cost of delivering the service. And one of the areas that I'm working on is to think about how we tax the broadband companies. They're taxed on the cost of construction. And I've been working on this for a long time, to think about how do we lower the cost of doing business in New York the broadband companies. And one of it is how the taxing structure works. And so thinking about broadband opportunity zones, and where within those zones, which are the unserved primarily areas, that we can treat them like the old empire zones, and maybe give a property tax abatement for a period of years for companies that build out in that area, to lower the cost of operations, lower the cost of construction, and provide an additional incentive. So I think there are some things that we need to do around that, to reach the unserved areas, because with the low density, the cost is going to be significant.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. That's really helpful. It's very insightful. So to build off that even further, how do you envision public-private partnerships playing a role in this process to bridge that rural divide? What steps can be taken from a government perspective and also the ISP perspective to try and facilitate that coordination?
So I think we see across New York State, and you're going to have some county representatives talking on a panel after our time together is done. But there are ways in which municipalities and counties are partnering with the ISPs in the planning, in putting in resources to help supplement the federal dollars, to try and bring this together. I think we also see some municipal broadband companies that are partnering with ISPs to do the installation, but create a municipal utility that can serve that region. So there are a variety of different strategies that our municipalities are pursuing. And I think that's what's really important, is that we have to be thinking outside the box. We have to be thinking about how can we partner together? Where are the ways that we can work together to achieve this goal? Because it is we're at that point where we've got, as I said, the ones that aren't served yet are going to be hard to reach, and it is going to take all of us working together.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So let's jump into when we reach this goal, when we all work together and we collaborate and we reach these rural communities. From your perspective as chair of the Assembly Small Business Committee, what do you think that's going to mean for these communities from an economic development perspective to how it impacts the lives of the people who live in these communities? Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. So we saw during the pandemic, which is now thankfully in our rearview mirror. But one of the things we saw is that people came from more urban communities and discovered the rural communities, and discovered what great quality of life we have in our rural communities. And they are able to relocate their lives to a rural community because of the availability of broadband. So where we have broadband already available, we're seeing people move into our rural communities and repopulate our upstate communities, which is tremendous. And they're bringing with them a lot of creativity and entrepreneurial energy. They're starting companies to make food products. We have wonderful farms, and now we have people who have that entrepreneurial spirit to say, oh, let me take these ingredients and create a new product line with that. We see artists coming to upstate New York. We see engineers, people who make things, furniture designers, all kinds of people who make things and who really appreciate the lifestyle in our rural communities. And that's made possible because they can access markets, they can access their jobs remotely because of broadband. So I think that when we finish this build out and we have all of our communities wired together, that what we'll see is that this is the step we need to bring more manufacturing, small manufacturing back, to bring a whole new generation of entrepreneurs online in our rural communities.
That is really exciting for both the businesses, the residents, the schools. It's it's a great opportunity, and I am very much looking forward to when we realize that as a state. I do have one more question while I have you, Assemblymember
Sure.
Warner. I know that you're also a very, very active member, as you mentioned, of farm communities, and you are on the New York State Assembly Committee on Agriculture as well. And I wanted to ask you to build a little bit more on what impacts does this have on the farming community? I guess I'm thinking about it from the perspective of what we talked about at the top of the call, challenges. I know that there's been conversations around how farming communities can be impacted and build out from a build out perspective, as well as what it could mean for the farm community beyond just the economic development perspective.
Sure. So agriculture has become a much more sophisticated profession from a technology perspective. So we have GPS guided tractors. We have precision agriculture where there is technology that is used to determine exactly where to plant, when to plant, how much water you need in different portions of the field, where you need herbicide, where you need fertilizer, to be as environmentally sensitive and as productive as you can be. Technology provides that great interface, but it's really all it's not it's not an application on a standalone computer. It's a wired app on your phone. It's an internet-based, web-based application. And so you have to be able to have that connectivity to just access that technology that allows farmers to be much more productive, to grow their yield, to do more with less labor, because that's a real shortage area. So there's that aspect to farming that is made better when we have connectivity in our rural communities. But the other piece is just accessing markets. So a lot of our farmers access the market through an online interface, whether that's because they have, for example, a meat product that they sell off the farm and they go to market online using social media, a website, they take online orders. They have to be able to process all of that. And so from a production as well as a go-to-market strategy, technology makes all the difference.
Really fascinating. And honestly, it's always fascinating to talk to you and to hear your perspective on the incredible work that you do across New York State, not just in your district. So we are immensely appreciative of your time today, Assembly Member, and always look forward to working with you on future endeavors as well. And at this point, I would like to pass this back over to my colleague, Alex Camarda, so that we can move on to the next phase of our panel today and hear from our county leaders.
Thanks, Jill, and thanks, Assemblymember Warner, for that fascinating discussion. Our final segment today features a panel of county leaders who will share their insights on the challenges, opportunities, and success stories in their efforts to bring broadband services to unserved and underserved areas of the counties they represent. I'll ask them to come on video now, but let me start with a few brief introductions. Cassie Buell is the Director of Planning and Development for Lewis County. In Cassie's current role, she has focused her efforts on expanding high-speed internet to the unserved populations of the rural county. Over the course of 3 years, Lewis County has utilized ARPA, CDBG, NBRC, and other local funds to complete fixed wireless projects, fiber extensions, and install free public Wi-Fi access points, a combination of which has resulted in new service to over 3,000 residents and businesses in the county. We're also joined by Genesee County Manager Matt Landers, who I've had the pleasure of working with directly. Matt was appointed County Manager and Budget Officer for Genesee County in August 2020, after serving the previous 6 years as the Assistant County Manager for Genesee County. He spearheaded the procurement process to secure over $8 million in funding to extend broadband to over 700 residents and businesses, which will bring broadband coverage to unserved residents once the project is completed. And then last but not least, we're joined by Laura Oswald, the Director of Economic Development for Washington County. Laura is currently responsible for fostering positive economic growth within Washington County and promulgating the many attributes of the small communities and businesses within the county to a wide and varied audience. She has more than 30 years of business, economic, and community development experience. She understands the challenges of the small business economy and is experienced in identifying tools and resources to help businesses and communities adapt in an ever-changing world. She is a staunch advocate for broadband in the county and views it as one of the necessary tools for growth. So thank you again, county leaders, for joining us here today. As we kick off our discussion, please don't hesitate to respond to any particular question that's directed to one of you or comments from your colleagues. If anything resonates and you'd like to jump in with an idea or thought, we really want this to be more of a dialogue than a Q&A. Having said that, let me start with a question to Cassie. We understand Lewis County was really one of the first, if not the first county in the state to conduct a broadband survey to identify underserved and unserved communities. Walk us through how you went about doing that to identify and accurately prioritize areas that needed broadband access.
Sure. And thank you, Alex, and the rest of the Spectrum and City and State New York team for having us all together to present some case studies and create some momentum or continue the momentum that's been had by a lot of our rural communities. So thank you, Alex. So Lewis County had started this process during the peak of COVID in 2020, and we work diligently with the Development Authority of the North Country, also known as DANC. They're a public authority that has been a tremendous asset to the North Country and especially Lewis County with our broadband planning and deployment. So we worked side by side with DANC to contract with ECC Technologies to complete not only just a survey of Lewis County residents, businesses, households, passings, but also to put a pen to paper on the actual inventory that we could map out with the help of engineers. So after we completed that survey in 2021, we hit the ground running. We started applying for grants just based upon the data that we received. The initial survey results came back that after 1,300 responses, about 91% of them are residents and 49% reported that they had no internet access. They used DSL, dial-up, or some sort of satellite device or cellular device for the internet, which is just not especially in the peak of COVID, it was hard enough to live at home, but when you're living at home and you're secluded at home with nothing to connect you to the outside world, it was really devastating for a lot of families, especially children who were looking to connect to education. So we hit the ground running based upon the data that we had. And that data gave us the ability to hone in on the unserved, and that's our main focus and has been our focus, is the unserved populations. Lewis County has a population of about 27,000 people. So to say that we do not have the density to make a lot of this deployment make sense is definitely a Lewis County problem. So we knew we had to go about it in a hybrid approach. So we used the data to decide where we would apply for funding for fixed wireless projects, to utilize county 911 towers and assets to affix those fixed wireless components to. And then we worked with a telecommunication provider that had access to certain mapping software that could show, okay, if we put an antenna on this tower, it would hit this location. We'd be able to serve this many users. But through that process, there was a lot of, we were able to identify a lot of areas that just we weren't able to hit everybody with fixed wireless. So that's when we started working with Spectrum and their government offices to help us connect and not only verify some of the unserved locations that we showed, but to work on expanding the Spectrum network alongside us. And we were able to confirm a lot of locations through that communication with Spectrum and work towards a project with Spectrum. So we're very helpful with that. And that actually begun when we were working on our NTI application alongside with that public-private partnership that was required. So very thankful for that opportunity to work with Spectrum on that. And then it spiraled into, focusing CDBG funds on the areas that the survey results showed, not only the census areas with the populations at LMI households, but that the survey results showed that, 71% of the respondents couldn't pay more than $75 a month. So then we started to really focus on fixed wireless in those locations that just we couldn't pay for with fiber expansion. So a lot of hybrid solutions in Lewis County because of our topography and our rural landscape, but definitely a lot of funding through NBRC, through CDBG, all of the great New York State Congresswoman Stefanik has been helpful, Senator Gillibrand, Senator Schumer, our Assemblyman Blankenbush. We've had so much support from New York State officials to get these funds in our pockets so that we can get them out.
Thank you, Cassie. And Laura, Matt, can you speak to your experience like Cassie's? Just it seems like the first step in establishing connectivity to homes and businesses is really just identifying who these, where these locations are, and engaging with those folks and giving them an opportunity to identify their needs.
Sure, I think that's absolutely true, and I also want to thank you, Alex, for inviting us. We are a very, although we are within the capital region of New York State, we are a very rural agricultural area, which has been alluded to, creates its own set of problems when trying to get broadband deployed. I think COVID was really a wake-up call for us all. To echo what Cassandra said, we too did a study with ECC Technologies to both do a survey of our residents, and we worked to map where existing infrastructure is so that we could start determining where there were small pockets of need, larger pockets of need, and start doing some planning for that. But I think when I say COVID was a wake-up call, one of the things that we found, because we had done a similar study about 5 years prior to that, and we found that while many residents were clamoring for broadband and interconnection, others, who maybe represent some of the more aging population, who don't travel large distances, sort of had this opinion, well, why do we need that? So once COVID hit, those minds changed really quickly, because now all of a sudden, if you wanted to connect with your grandchildren or you needed to get education for your children, the only way to do that was through technology. And if those connections weren't there, we had people sitting in cars outside of libraries trying to get hotspots so that they could do their homework. So I think that was a real wake-up call for everybody. So again, we too did some additional mapping and planning, and we were able to secure some funding in partnership with Congresswoman Stefanik through USDA to get a grant to add some additional connections. And then we are also using some ARPA money to partner with agencies to do some planning to deliver additional build out. So, we are still very much in the planning stages. We are what I would call Swiss cheese, which as a result of the previous build out, while we have many areas that are covered, we end up with blocks of 6 homes, a dozen homes that while they might be surrounded by broadband infrastructure, they aren't covered. So it's the looking for a needle in a haystack kind of thing, trying to determine who really does and who does not have coverage. So we are through that process. I think we have identified those who really do not have coverage. But there are also other interesting issues that come up as a part of that, because when you're in an area where you have a lot of seasonal camps or second homes, we have a lot of Amish population. So how do you plan for that? I think our priority has to be full-time residents, But at the same time, people who are visiting for the summer want access to connectivity as well. So does a fiber solution make sense? Does fixed wireless make sense? So it comes down to isolating the geography, the technology, the proximity of technology, and trying to come up with a plan that best fits the needs of the residents, but also is practical for the providers, because the providers have to be able to both deliver that infrastructure and operate it, and obviously generate revenue to operate it. So whatever we plan out has to work for everybody.
Thank you, Laura. And Matt, did you want to weigh in here in terms of, just starting with identifying the needs of the residents and how the county went about that? And I think it was interesting what Laura brought up about kind of the sea change in sentiment during the pandemic, and would be interested in hearing if that occurred in your county as well.
Absolutely. So COVID was what brought this to the forefront. The high-speed internet access was an issue, but it wasn't as big of an issue here in Genesee County. So there hadn't been done extensive surveys previously. And then when COVID hit, it really rose this issue close to the forefront. It was at that time that the county decided to make the commitment. We saw the ARPA funds as a driving force to help pay for this project. And we went on a search to see if we could find additional funding. But it really was the COVID experience and the community coming out, as the colleagues here have been talking about, sitting in library parking lots, trying to access small businesses, trying to get their products out in a different manner. That really prompted this. In Genesee County, we were lucky enough, Alex, early on with Charter and Spectrum, to have some maps, some work done with the organization that helped alleviate the need for potentially ECT or some other company to come in and slow down the process. One of the things that impacted us was, as a rural county, as similar to my colleagues here, Genesee County, under 60,000 people, there's only so much bandwidth for large scale projects. And we also are in the process of completing a $70 million jail, and in the process of $170 million water phase 2 and phase 3 build out for countywide public water. So the appetite, the desire from the public to have this was one, but the ability to throw more resources at it was quite limiting. NVRC would have been a great option for us, as Cassandra was able to use in Lewis County. In Genesee County, that was already going towards water. So we were juggling several large projects, and with limited opportunities. So we went the route of ARPA. We're utilizing some state shared service money that we've been able to capture. Then in addition, we've been able to utilize reserves to cover this. I think that, Alex, you and I have talked in the past about the frustrations of trying to chase down additional state monies and the strings that come along with that. Here in Genesee County, early on in the process that we decided this, it was absolutely going to be a wired solution. We really wanted to finish the project and kind of put it behind us and not have a patchwork. I understand absolutely other counties using a different system, but for us it was going to be a wired solution, and it was going to be just for unserved. I know other counties, especially more urban counties, have differing needs with urban centers, with looking at underserved and equity issues. In Genesee County, first and foremost, we had over 700 address points of people that had no access, and that was absolutely the priority that our legislature put forth. That we realized that internet access had risen to the level of water, sewer, power, so that it was a high priority. But it was, so basically for us in Genesee County, as soon as COVID hit, this prioritized it with limited bandwidth, and the marching orders was and we had to hit every single unserved address point, and then we were off and running, and we had our partnership with Alex here and Charter and early stages of that process, but so far so good.
Thanks, Matt. Let me come back to Laura, but certainly others can jump in as well. Talk to us about your engagement of the residents. I know you touched on this with some of the hunting camps and like just the diversity of homes and need that you experienced. How did you communicate with residents and get a better sense of that? And how did it inform your planning?
As I mentioned, we, in partnership with ECC Technologies, did a survey, right? Like everybody does a survey, and the survey was a series of questions, and then with the ability to, make some open-ended comments at the end of it. The difficulty that we ran into with that is that survey was actually deployed at the time the former Broadband for All program was still being deployed. So the problem on the timing was that pretty much the majority of the county is indicating via the survey process that they don't have internet. Well, internet was coming, it had been funded, it just hadn't been constructed yet. So we kind of had to go back to the beginning of the table once we did that survey to try and understand, okay, now that these new connections have been deployed, now what's really left? But by now you've got survey fatigue. Like, how many people want to fill out survey after survey? And then after we tried to do another one, the state did another one. So after a while, people kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, I already answered that question 42 times. So essentially, it became a matter of using the mapping of infrastructure that we had completed along with GIS to literally do a parcel by parcel review to try and determine who was proximate to infrastructure. And then when the FCC mapping effort happened, to start comparing it to that data. So meanwhile, we've also reached out at the town level to say, hey, we think we have a pretty good idea of who actually remains without service. And I echo Matt's comment as well. I mean, our priority has to be those who do not have access to anything. I think, encouraging competition amongst the ISPs and encouraging choice is all a good thing. But for those of us who don't have access to anything, something is really good. We'd all love to have something. So, now that we've made that determination, it becomes a matter of, saying we encourage our population to reach out to their local representatives, to reach out to my office, because as hard as we've worked to get it 100% accurate, I can guarantee you it isn't. We will have gotten something wrong somewhere, and once we've identified and heard about that, we will address it as part of the planning. But it is a really difficult undertaking because there is no one source of information. It's a compilation of what do I see on the ground, what do I hear from FCC, what do I hear from the state, what am I hearing from the residents. And you put a picture together that identifies, okay, we're down to these are the actual list of residents that are not necessarily a hunting cabin in the woods, but that are full-time residents who absolutely need to be connected to the internet.
If I could just chime in, Laura, that's sounds like a similar situation here in Genesee County with trying to ensure that we're capturing the right houses, between the state maps and then also Charter doing some initial review, and the county kind of going and morphing those two together. We were able to put together nice maps the planning department put together that I basically went town by town. So I sat with all 13 town supervisors here in Genesee County, asked them to bring all the stakeholders to the table that could identify where there might be gaps in their community. And I took the time to sit there and lay out the maps with the listing. And we You know, whether some towns brought their school superintendent, some towns brought their planning folks, some towns brought their assessor, and we would sit there and take as long as it would take to. And it's not even then. It's not bulletproof. It's not 100%, but they know best their community. And this was kind of two things: one, to try to sharpen the map, but two, also to get the buy-in, and that that it later on, if there is some address points that we potentially missed, that yes, we'll fix it, but it shows the effort that we took to make sure that we hit everybody as possible. Make sure there wasn't a small road that was missed, and through that process, we did have hunting cabins that were pulled off, where that the town supervisor said absolutely that there's no need, though that's only used for hunting. Do not bring internet down there. They're never going to use that. And on the flip side, there might have been a couple of economic development projects, business park type areas that absolutely the developer should be covering that. Take those off, and then in some cases it was missed. There was a building, a farm building that was there that we really need to have connectivity to. So it was a lengthy process that we went through after having the state map along with some mapping from charter. But it was worth the process, and within each town we inevitably had a house or two that we would add or take off because of that process.
Yeah, I would also add to that one of the things that adds to the confusion is residents don't always know what they have access to. Even after the state broadband build out, we would get calls that say, like, I need access to internet, and we'd check availability, and it's like, well, okay, have you called Spectrum? They're right on your road. Oh, didn't know I could do that. So, it's again, it becomes a compilation of information and education about what is available out there. So it's not an easy task for anybody who just says we ought to be able to just give internet to everybody. Well, that's true, but it's a lot harder than people think.
So it sounds like a lot of different sources to navigate, different areas to turn to for information, different programs, state, local. So let me turn back to Cassie. It seemed like you were going to jump in here anyway.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Why don't
If
you
I
finish your
may,
thought?
building off of Laura and Matt, I think something that hasn't been brought up is the RDOF funds that have been assigned or delegated to, some service providers, because that really kind of ties our hands with certain things that we can do in those areas that have been awarded. So that's even more of a reason why it's a giant puzzle. I can't tell you how many people, and I'm sure Laura and Matt have gotten this phone calls as well. You're not served. I want to serve you. I can't apply for funding to serve you. You're an RDOF area. You'll be served by 2028. And it's not, we know it's not fair to them. So that's frustrating. And that's why I think it's even more important that that the community understands that it is a large white puzzle at this point. We're trying to piece together as many funding mechanisms as we can. There's a lot of really great ones available, but that's kind of creating some of the issues because there's a bit of overlap in a lot of those funding mechanisms. I know that there's one open right now, the MIP, Municipal Infrastructure Program through the state, Connect All office, a great program for open access broadband. And I think that the phase 2 closes on April 19th. So there's that opportunity, but then there's also other opportunities. There's appropriation requests that you can submit if you have the planning in place. We've had really good luck with CDBG infrastructure grant programs, and NBRC has been really wonderful to us. But it really is a big puzzle piece, and it has a lot to do with the partnerships that we have with the service providers like Spectrum. They've helped us tremendously with putting those puzzle pieces together, and your willingness to work with us on NTI applications and upcoming Connect All program, like the rural broadband grant program that we're expecting hopefully later this year. So again, it's a lot of the frustration is the funding, but there is a lot of funding available.
Okay, thanks, Cassie. Let me come back to Laura, but this is really a question for everyone. I mean, given all these different moving pieces that you folks have described, what policy changes or regulatory reforms do you think would be helpful in just navigating this process?
I think one of the confusing issues is we all want broadband, right? We as residents, we as government, we as state agencies, we all want to see broadband deployed. Different state agencies have different mandates. The PSC wants to see utility costs low. The broadband office wants to see broadband deployed. DOT needs to keep our roads paved. All of these state entities, as well as our local entities and local governments who may own easements and right of way, all are a component of this big puzzle that it's going to need to be put together in order to actually achieve that, that broadband for all, or at least, up to the 99% range. So I think the advocacy from a state agency standpoint, again, a PSC, keep utility rates low. Well, fiber gets hung on utility poles that are owned by utility providers, like it's all coming out of our pockets one way or the other. So I think maybe a bit more of let's step back a bit and look at the big picture and make sure that utilities and DOT and state agencies and local governments are all coordinated, all have their mandates met, and yet are partners in helping things to move forward. And I believe the Connect All office understands that, but they, like all of the rest of this, they're a piece of that puzzle, and we all have to be working together in order to actually get this done.
Matt, any thoughts on policy changes or regulatory reforms you'd like to see that would ease broadband connectivity based on your experience?
Not to be overly simple or generalized, but just a simplification of the process. I think that some of the funding is trying to accomplish too much. I think whether it's the underserved, it's the equity issue, it's the competitiveness. I think there's a lot of boxes that some of these funding sources are trying to check. And Genesee County, quite simply, we aren't interested in some of the strings that come along with some of the funding. Some of the funding opportunities out there, as was suggested, the NBRC is a great opportunity, but when a county of our size and resources has other competing interests, we had to prioritize some of those sources elsewhere. We were lucky enough to use ARPA funds, which had a lot less regulation attached to it, but some of the funding that's out there, quite simply, the county doesn't want to own fiber or own the lines. We don't want to require open source. We don't want to, at the end of the day, we want to connect effectively and efficiently people that don't have access to high-speed internet. And there really doesn't seem to be a catch-all or an easy pot of money that we can go after for that. We've utilized Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council leadership just to ensure that there aren't funding opportunities that we are passing on. Coming up, more recently, the funding going to ISPs to finish the build outs. For us in Genesee County, our fear is quite simply that the length that will take to complete. The fact that state officials have said that at the end of the day, there's 711 address points in Genesee County. They would connect probably through that pot of money. They'd probably connect on their own 80%. Well, that means that there's 20%, and I absolutely know it'll be the 20% that is the most costly for us to do. So we'd be coming in after the fact, years later, with an even more irate taxpayer base here in Genesee County, just saying that here it is again, government can't seem to fix the problem, and how much should we ultimately save when the cost per passing would go through the roof for us to cover those last 20%. So that it is the combination that we have made the decision here in Genesee County to utilize a good segment of our own reserves in conjunction with ARPA funds and some state shared service money to close the gap, do it effectively and efficiently. We have a contract in place right now that I think is significantly less costly than what ultimately the state and federal government would do if they were in charge of it. And it would be great if there was just a way that we could have a plan submitted and get some partial funding for a logical, common sense public-private partnership like we have entered into with Spectrum.
Thanks, Matt. So let me turn to Cassie for a question regarding something that you referenced, which was really just kind of working internally within the county, all the different stakeholders that you have. Cassie, how did you navigate that process in Lewis County and bring people together behind the solutions that you ultimately came up with?
Well, I wish I could take credit for bringing most of us together, but I feel like that just happened naturally. We're consistently working with the Development Authority on a variety of other things, and they are really the knowledge base for us. They've taught us a lot about everything to do with telecommunications and the broadband deployment. So they all the credit goes towards Dank on that one, but it's not just the infrastructure. It's our economic development agency and the housing agencies and the local clubs and groups that reach out to us consistently. They have our phone number and they know how to find us, which is great. Another great part about being in a rural community is they're not afraid to give us a call and to keep checking in on a lot of these projects. But keeping the momentum going is not difficult for us. Like I said, we just continue to chase the funding. I will say I love Matt and Genesee County's strategy where you just, use the local funds. It takes the strings away. It makes things easier. You get it done. And I know that if we could do that, and if there was a way to that, we would definitely be in that same boat. So kudos to Genesee County there. That seems like a great, just knowing on managing grants. And I'm sure Laura and Matt are very aware. It's a challenge just to manage a typical infrastructure grant. But then when you have, one project that has 3 different funding mechanisms, it does create quite an issue. So the ARPA funds did give us the ability to invest in a fiber solution and expansion that did not have as many strings attached. That was very much appreciated. And we took that burden on for the towns and villages so that they could use their ARPA funds for their local water infrastructure projects or infrastructure needs. So we do understand that was a huge benefit to our towns and for the county to be able to use those ARPA funds. But definitely networking, communication, because once you think you uncover one, that connection uncovers 3 more opportunities. And just this discussion alone, I'm learning a lot of other strategies that we can discuss and kind of put together packages for. So it's great to be able to come together for discussions like these.
Thanks, Cassie. So why don't I close with this last question to all 3 of you? And the question is, if you were to, begin this anew, there are certain counties that, haven't gone in depth or created the connectivity that you folks had and are, newer to the process. What advice would you give them and really any of the stakeholders in this process beyond a county? Could be an internet service provider, the state. What suggestions would you have having gone through this already? Why don't we start with Matt?
Gosh, I don't know. Don't do it. I don't know. It's beating my head against the wall on this process. I guess we learned a lot from this. I think that we potentially may have carved our county up a little bit differently. We're all. I'll be honest. There might have been better opportunities for us to tackle our counties and stages potentially. We're all in with this. I know more about the relationship with the state and federal. And potentially I would have advocated harder for some change going back a few years ago. I would have had more input into when some of the state funds were potentially being discussed and how to deploy them. So I think I might have been stronger on the advocacy side. But I am happy with the stakeholders that I brought together in the community. I look at the team that was on our RFP review and implementation. I look at the engagement with the 13 towns, and I think they're appreciative that they all had their voice heard. So that I'm very happy with. So I guess early on, just a bit more advocacy to try to get to a position where at the end of the day, we're not stuck with utilizing such a large amount of local resources. Yes, it's nice to not have the strings attached to that, but again, it's local taxpayer funds that are covering a lot of this in order to get this solution resolved. So or this problem resolved. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I guess advocacy and I go back even further. I wish the county would have started this process sooner. I wish it didn't take COVID for this to really boil to the top. But it is what it is, and at the end of the day, I am pleased at the point that we're at, and hopefully within the next 2 years we could sign off and say that every single resident in Genesee County has access to high-speed internet.
Thanks, Matt. Laura, lessons learned and advice for others, including us?
Well, I think firstly I would segue off of what Matt just said, which is that as much as COVID was that wake-up call, I sort of wish that we had been cognizant of how difficult an issue this was going to be and started a bit earlier, because one of the problems that I foresee with the way the federal infrastructure and BEAD funding is being deployed, and in partnership with all of our state agencies, and in this case, the New York State Connect All, is that if you think about it, all of that federal money is being deployed to all of the states at the same time, who are all at the same time going to be trying to roll out a broadband program, and at the same time, all trying to access the same linemen, the same coils of fiber, the same trucks on the road with buckets. So you know, everybody cannot be in the same place with the same supplies at the same time. But and that's going to have to be accounted for, I think, in the rollout of any coming program. So I think the further you're along in terms of identification and planning of what your priorities and what your rollout needs to look like, it helps everybody, because again, you can't, everybody cannot be doing the same thing at the same time. So some sort of a phased approach moving forward in terms of, allocation of those resources is going to have to be part of the planning. Otherwise, we're all going to be clamoring for the same things at the same time. So
Certainly some daunting demands on capacity. So why don't we close with Cassie, with your recommendations for all the stakeholders embarking on this challenge?
I would concur with both Laura and Matt, and especially in our case, advocacy. I think I took it for granted. I was kind of boots on the ground in the trenches, trying to plan and distribute the broadband deployments and implement the grant programs, that I didn't take a lot of time to sit back and look at, okay, my voice could be heard when, Connect All is putting together their programs or what have you. And I took for granted some of those sessions that probably would have been beneficial for me to give them a list of things that have went wrong during this process, and things that would certainly make our lives easier. So definitely the advocacy. But again, there's only so many of us to work on these projects. So time is and has been limited over the last 3-4 years. So I guess if I were to do it all over again, I'd make sure that I was sitting in on if I did most of them, but all of the meetings, to make sure that, our concerns were loud and clear.
Well, thank you, Cassie and Laura and Matt, for joining this program today, and for your dedication in getting unserved and underserved homes connected. I think this has been an insightful dialogue, and hopefully has revealed all the challenges and complexities involved in connecting residences to broadband. I want to now turn to John to close out the program, but we really hope that this has been useful in providing insights, and provides a path forward for all of us to collaborate together, because there's certainly still more work to be done. John.
Great. Thank you, Alex. What a fantastic discussion. On behalf of City and State, I'd like to thank all the speakers who shared their insights today. Thanks again to Alex and to Charter for partnering with us on an event focused on this timely topic. And thanks to everyone who tuned in to today's program. And that concludes the program. Thank you.